Okay, let's dive into this. Welcome to today's Explainer, where we're going to uncover the exact, objective breakdown of the physical and mental cycle of nicotine use. We're basing this entirely on our source data, and we're going to unpack the actual chronological timeline of what it really means to be caught in this loop. We're talking about mapping out the precise sensations before, during, and after a person smokes or vapes. It's a pretty simple question on the surface, right? What actually happens to the mind and body before, during, and after a smoke? But the answer is incredibly complex. Today, we're tracking the visceral reality of a single smoking or vaping session. We aren't just throwing around generalized theories here. We're looking at the exact timeline and the exact sensations that hit the human system from the moment a craving begins straight through to the hours after the smoke is cleared.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how it lays out a perfectly predictable chronological loop. Just look at this timeline. We start 15 minutes before, characterized by cravings and agitation. Then 0 minutes, the act itself, which is marked by a burning sensation and a huge head rush. Fast forward just 5 minutes after, and we already see guilt and brain fog setting in. Finally, 2 hours later, the tension returns and it resets the entire clock. We're going to follow this exact loop step by step.
So, phase 1. Before smoking. The building urge. The cycle actually doesn't start with lighting up or taking a drag. It kicks off with these initial psychological and physical triggers: restlessness, irritability, and FOMO, the fear of missing out. But our source data paints a much broader picture of this internal pressure that completely hijacks your focus. Before the act even begins, users report feeling this deep sense of tension and anxiety. They describe feeling incomplete or just kind of off, dealing with intense mental preoccupation and really low patience. There's this profound edginess and boredom. Ultimately, it manifests as compulsive thinking about smoking. It's an impulse-driven urgency that creates this immense internal pressure just demanding to be released.
That brings us to phase 2, during smoking. The physical reality.
This is where the buildup finally breaks. And boom, an overwhelming sensory overload hits the body instantly. We're talking a burning throat, an incredibly harsh taste, coughing, and a sudden dizzy head rush, right alongside an increased heart rate and shortness of breath. But the data shows it absolutely doesn't stop there. Users are simultaneously experiencing chest tightness, eye irritation, and a completely dry mouth that leaves a bitter aftertaste. The body just reacts wildly. You've got sweating, wheezing, excess mucus production, the mind goes into overdrive with racing thoughts, while the body is dealing with jaw tension, hiccups, acid reflux, tingling, feeling faint, and a very sudden, temporary loss of exercise capacity. Basically, the system is in shock.
Which leads us right into phase 3, immediately after the crash.
The frantic energy ends, and the heavy reality abruptly sets in. There's this incredibly stark contrast between what you expect to feel and what you actually get. The physical toll hits hard. Bad breath, a lingering smoke smell, a sticky mouth, a heavy chest, coughing fits, and just sudden fatigue. But honestly, the mental toll is arguably worse. We see instant regret, deep guilt, feeling entirely dependent, brain fog, and social embarrassment. Adding to this immediate aftermath, the source notes a painfully dry throat, suddenly reduced energy, mild nausea, intense self-criticism, and a noticeable reduction in the senses of taste and smell. There's financial regret and just a pervasive lingering feeling of being dirty.
Let's move on to phase 4. A few hours later, the trap resets.
Let's see how this builds as the nicotine actually begins to leave the bloodstream. It's a brutal comparison, really. On one side, you drop into emotional flatness, low motivation, a really noticeable mood drop, and difficulty concentrating. But simultaneously, the cravings and tension come roaring right back. Irritability spikes, hunger fluctuates wildly. You become impatient, restless, and frustrated. Users are struck with the heavy, undeniable realization that they're trapped right back in the very cycle they just tried to escape.
All right, let's step back for a second and look at the macro view, the long-term toll.
Now that we've seen the micro timeline of a single session, let's zoom out. The long-term, systemic impacts on the body are compounding and severe. Over time, we're looking at a chronic morning cough and phlegm, reduced lung capacity, wheezing, yellow teeth, and gum disease. The circulatory system takes a massive hit, leading to poor circulation, which is why you get those cold hands and feet. There's faster exhaustion, reduced overall fitness, sleep disruption, snoring, and dull, aging skin. And our source data actually expands on this extensively. Users develop a chronically hoarse voice, they experience significantly slower wound healing, and they're prone to way more frequent respiratory infections. Over time, there's a permanent reduction in the sense of smell and taste, constant eye irritation, an elevated resting heart rate, and even reduced sexual performance.
But it's not just physical. Let's look at the hidden mental burden, the emotional and psychological downsides.
While those physical impacts are highly visible, the psychological chains are often far heavier. Just look at how our source defines dependence. It's a state characterized by loss of control, feeling hooked, and feeling manipulated by one's own cravings. Just let the weight of those words sink in for a moment. It's not just a bad habit, it's a profound loss of internal autonomy.
And this lack of autonomy generates a massive psychological cost. Users live with shame and self-disappointment. They harbor this constant looming fear of the health consequences. There's ongoing financial stress. They engage in secrecy and avoidance behaviors, which inevitably leads to social isolation. Plus, there's an ever-present anxiety about running out of their supply, which requires constant daily planning just to accommodate the habit. Our source data highlights how this cascade of stress leads to a deeply reduced confidence in your own self-control. It sparks relationship conflicts, a persistent fear of judgment from others, and ultimately, an exhausting feeling of being completely chained to the habit.
Which brings us to the final cycle, withdrawal.
This is the barrier. This is the exact reason the user goes right back to the beginning of the timeline. Withdrawal is what happens when nicotine entirely leaves the body. It triggers strong cravings, irritability, anger, brain fog, and intense mental discomfort. But the reality is even broader than that. The source data describes a crushing wave of frustration, nervousness, and severe restlessness. Sleep problems and strange dreams become common. The user experiences an unnaturally increased appetite, profound fatigue, and a lingering sense of feeling empty. There's just this overarching temporary difficulty in simply enjoying normal everyday things. So, the crucial point is, we arrive at the central paradox of our entire explainer. Look at this vicious cycle. Step 1. Discomfort and cravings set in. Step 2. The act of smoking to fix it. Step 3. Brief relief, immediately followed by regret. Step 4. The cravings return. It's wild when you think about it. The user is smoking a cigarette simply to relieve the agonizing discomfort that was actually caused by the previous cigarettes.
The relief doesn't last. This is a direct quote from the source data, and it's a visceral sensation reported by so many users. They chase the relief, but it vanishes instantly, leaving them with exactly what they started with. Only now they also report things like, "My chest feels heavy," and "My lungs feel dirty."
I'm already thinking about the next one. This quote highlights the absolute psychological trap of the cycle. While they are actively experiencing physical discomfort, literally reporting that their throat burns, they feel nauseous, and they're highly aware they smell like smoke, their brain is already overriding that physical pain to plan for the very next dose.
I feel dependent. At the end of the session, as users realize they can't breathe as deeply as they used to, they universally arrive at this conclusion. They feel dependent, and they state plainly, "I regret it afterward."
Which leaves us with this final thought to consider regarding this entire mechanical loop. We've looked at the data, the physical reactions, and the mental toll. And it begs the question, if the relief is only temporary and the discomfort is constant, who is really in control?